So, I mean, one of the things I wanted to mention in your panel earlier, you mentioned that you thought passing legislation was like the World Cup. I hooked on you. Can you explain that a bit more? And that centers around Senator Reid's bill.
Legislation really is like a sporting event because you can't just show up for the Super Bowl or the World Cup and expect to win. I mean, can you imagine some of these teams if they just showed up the day of the World Cup? Mm-hmm. Well, that's what a lot of people do with U.S. federal legislation, is they wait until the final days of the vote, and then they can't figure out why there isn't support. So I try to compare it to where you literally need to be involved from the moment the player is picked, to the preseason, to the regular season, to the playoff, and then for the World Cup. Because by then you've created relationships and you have mutual respect by the person or the decision maker, a member of Congress. Again, if they don't know who you are, they don't know what the issue is, you can't assume that they're going to understand unless you tell them. So that's why I compare it to the World Cup. People show up for that game and they get beat. Well, of course they're going to get beat. Same thing with legislation.
Yeah, no, great. And one of the other things you raised, which I sort of hooked onto, you said you thought some people were going against Senator Reid's bill because it was Senator Reid's bill, you know, and that more people need to get behind it. Is that something you think that is happening and is going to continue to happen?
Yeah, the more powerful you are, I don't care if it's in your community or in Parliament or in the U.S. Congress or Senate, you're going to have a tendency to have people that are opposed to whatever you want, just because. So you have the dynamics where you have the majority leader of the U.S. Senate, who's a Democrat. You have, of course, have the U.S. House of Representatives that's a Republican. The nature of politics is that particular party doesn't want the other party to have a win, especially if they think that for Senator Reid, for the state of Nevada, they're going to take a personal interest in seeing that it fails. Sure. So I've worked closely with Senator Reid, and part of my role was to try to encourage Republican members of Congress, that this legislation is about protecting families, protecting children. It's about New Jersey, it's about Iowa, it's about New York, Florida, and Nevada, of course. But initially, the first bill was very Nevada, New Jersey centric. It basically said Nevada, New Jersey would control would be the incoming portion of international gaming. That was 4 years ago. The bill changed, evolved, but there still was an impression that this was Senator Reid's bill. So the nature, his name may not be Senator Reid, it may be Senator Kyle, or it may be Senator Heller. There are people that don't want you to have a win in politics, especially if they think it's personal. So we tried to make sure that members of Congress understand this was what's good for the nation and for the world, not just for Senator Reid.
Yeah, great. And one of the things that was discussed earlier was the feasibility of extending this beyond poker and into other forms of gambling. Is that something you think is going to happen in the near future, or is that a long term?
It's actually a very complex question because the U.S. Department of Justice came out with a ruling, I guess 2 years ago now, as time flies, that said that basically gaming, except for sports betting, is legal online. So the states now are rushing to pass legislation based upon an opinion from the Department of Justice. So to answer your question, mechanically, it's possible there would be more than just poker. Likely not at the end of the day, because there really hasn't been a debate about full-scale gaming online. There's been a lot of debate about, poker, game of skill, game of chance. The argument that you're playing, you're not playing against the house, you're playing against other players. So yes, it could happen state by state. I don't think there will ever be federal legislation in the near term that would include all full-scale gaming.
Sure. And a lot of things are going state by state, it seems, at the moment with Delaware, Nevada. And do you think that's the way it's going to continue, or do you think there will be a federal bill to step in?
I am no doubt there will have to be federal legislation. Is it today or tomorrow, or when's it going to be? I don't know, but it has to happen. You can't have 50 states with 50 different rules. And in fairness, the EU, is way ahead of us of internet gaming, but even challenges there within the EU with many different regulations. So let's just be practical for a moment. If you want to have a safe, secure gaming platform on the internet, you can't have 50 different rules. No. Not unlike banking, you can't have 50 different banking rules. Each state can have their own, of course, but you need a threshold, a platform for interstate and intrastate gaming. So I believe it's going to have to happen. It could happen if there's a scandal. It could happen faster. But I think that the problem is the industry has wanted the perfect. Each industry wanted the perfect. The lotteries wanted it perfect. The commercial operators wanted it perfect to them, of course. Mm-hmm. The tribal nations wanted it perfect to them. I mean, the manufacturers wanted it perfect to them. And that's why I'm convinced that had these groups come to some compromise, 5 or 6 things or 10 things they could all have agreed on, then we could have tweaked it later to take care of some of the special interests. But this is a classic case in politics when the perfect gets in the way of the practical and reasonable. And I've always been a believer in if you take a sailboat out into the ocean and there's a storm, you don't just take the sailboat into the storm. You tack the sailboat across the ocean or across the lake. And now, by the way, I'm not a sailor, but I've watched it. But I know if you send a sailboat into the storm, it's going to sink. Well, that's what happened. Instead of tacking legislation, doing it gradually, inching it through, which I think would have passed. In essence, by trying to make it perfect for everybody, no one got along. And members of Congress have a short attention span. Again, I don't care if you're in Parliament, or you're in the state legislature, or you're in the White House. There's a short attention span. You have an opportunity to state your case, but you need to let them know that there's a consortium or there's interests that are supporting it. And in the case of federal legislation, what would happen is the traditional Democrat states who would normally support internet gaming, a lot of them were lottery states. Right. So the lotteries would go to their legislators who would go to their members of Congress and say, we can't have internet gaming, we can't have internet gaming. So you had all these mixed signals, and I said during the presentation, I think a big mistake was made with the tribal nations. Initially, they were left out. Yeah. Which I don't think was a very good.
Well, there's such a large part of the gaming in California, in particular.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And just a final point. Do you think events like Gigsy and conferences of this nature are the right place for these people to get together to share their views, to get the right situation, so we're not fighting at these various levels of perfection, or is there other ways to handle it?
Oh, well, let's talk about Clarion Gaming as a rule. I think that the Clarion Gaming is a first-class job. They make sure that there's the best in the industry. The support from the staff at Clarion Gaming is phenomenal. And then you take the events from ICE to Gigsy. This is the World Cup. Gigsy and ICE are the World Cup of gaming and internet gaming. It's an opportunity where these folks that are here today or at ICE, they've been working it through the year. They're not unlike the ball team. They've been there in the preseason. They're building their team. They're playing the team. This is the World Cup of the gaming industry. The best, the brightest are here, and you've made platforms available for us to communicate so successfully. We're a technology business. You're a technology events company, and you've made it very simple for us to communicate with other people in this business. So I'm a huge fan. I've met some folks that have become some of my best friends at the events, but I guess more importantly, the Gigsy and ICE and your events help mold federal, in the U.S., federal legislation, because this is an opportunity for the industry, one of the best opportunities for the industry to get together and talk about what's good for the industry. So not only from a platform for business development and for education, I take it back to Washington, D.C., what I've learned and what I hear, and about the ability to work together with the industry that I take back from Gigsy and from ICE.